The way the White Sox keep losing games means it's time to accept that the franchise must trade Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert Jr. before the deadline. I'll discuss why next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of Southside Showdown, part of the Fansided Network. You can check out my written content at SouthsideShowdown.com. And also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. Make sure to turn on those notifications as well. And also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the Chicago White Sox lost last night to the Texas Rangers 3-2. The Sox have now lost 9 in a row and are 27-76. And the way they are losing games, basically playing inept baseball, poor defense, bad base running, an impotent lineup, and a terrible bullpen, has led me to believe that while in my heart, I will always be a die on that hill, keep Crochet and Robert Jr., in my gut and in my mind, the Sox have to trade those two before the deadline, and I'll discuss why in the first segment. In the second segment, I hope to never see Yoan Moncada ever wear a White Sox uniform again, and I mean it in a nice way. I'll discuss the latest update on him and why he should never play for the Sox again. And finally, it is Wednesday. That means Way Back Wednesday, and since yesterday was the 15-year anniversary of Mark Buerhle's perfect game, and the Sox have Drew Thorpe, whose career could be on the same trajectory as the Sox legendary pitcher. Let's talk about Mark's amazing career. This episode of Locked On White Sox is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. Well, I hate to sound like a politician, as, again, in my heart, I'm still on a die on that hill. Do not trade Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert Jr. They're draws. They're worth watching on this terrible team. And I've outlined it, my stance on why they should keep them in previous episodes. But the reason why I'm going to accept that the Sox are going to potentially alternate their franchise by dealing away their 2 stars is the context has changed to where trading them makes more sense than keeping them. The Sox did not use the draft to select a future impact bat. They selected some guys who can be complementary pieces. I'm hopeful on some of the guys that they picked can be guys that could be starters someday or in trade packages. But there's not that like Bobby Witt Jr. type impact bat like the Kansas City Royals have. And remember, the Sox are, for some strange reason, trying to replicate the Royals, although this year they're playing great baseball. So, hey, at least get a Bobby Witt Jr. Also, the way the Sox keep losing games is more than just the team being talent deficient. They need a full-out franchise flush. It's not even a rebuild. They got to flush the remnants of the 2021 AL Central Division Championship team that also underachieved so poorly that we're now in the current state that we're in. This team plays dumb baseball for example, the Rangers. They got their second run when they pulled off an easy double steal. Corey Lee throws the second. Runner on third dashes for home. And Nicky Lopez, instead of rifling the ball back to home, or Lee just eating the throw to keep the guy at third, he tries to tag out the guy at second. Run scores. Smart baseball, guys. Also, with how Luis Robert Jr. continues to not find his groove after his return from injury, he continues to look like he would rather be any place else but wearing a Chicago White Sox uniform. He continues to trend towards not being a foundational piece in which the next competitive team can be built around. There are just too many question marks around the bats that have the talent to potentially be key cogs on the next good team in the minors, that the Sox probably have to leverage Crochet and Robert Jr. to get them. For example, I watched a tiny bit of the Charlotte Knights game last night, and let me give you a sequence of events. Top of the ninth. Now, granted, Charlotte's up 7-2. So they got a guy in scoring position. All it's going to do is just continue to further pile on Nashville. Edgar Carroll, catcher of the future's up. He draws a walk. All right, good, good. Colson Montgomery, the top prospect. 2 pitches in, pops up, fouls out, goes hitless for the game. Brian Ramos, the potential future at third base. 2 pitches in, weak ground out. Those two are not exactly wowing at AAA, and they're supposed to be a part of the future good team and the foundation potentially. Carroll, Ramos, Montgomery, and Gonzalez. And only Carroll and Gonzalez, only Carroll's the one that you could really feel confident in and that he's showing in the minors that he could be a stud. Gonzalez is showing that he could probably be a solid player. But Montgomery and Ramos, they're also supposed to be stars, and there are just way too many question marks on them. So the Sox have to go out and replenish the bats that they have in their system. And the only way they can do it now is to trade their 2 best assets. And former Rockies GM Dan O'Dowd, he's the one that built the 2007 Rockies team that went to the World Series. He was on foul territory, and he made a great point that the Sox need to aim for 2027 as when they're going to be ready to compete again. And since they will not have much club control over Crochet and Garrett Jr. by then, Robert Jr. by then, because Crochet is a free agent in 2026. Robert Jr. would be a free agent after the 2027 season. It makes sense to move all pieces who will not be with the team by 2027. And O'Dowd, if he was he's saying if he was the GM of the White Sox, he'd be trading basically every piece that could not even have a potential chance to be on the 2027 team. So that's even like you're talking about Andrew Vaughn, and I think they should trade Andrew Vaughn. I'm at that point now where I just keep watching this team play terrible baseball and just look lifeless, that they need to basically trade everybody but Drew Thorpe, Jonathan Cannon, and I keep saying Corey Lee just because he's a cheap backup catcher. And as I discussed yesterday, the White Sox, they're just not hey, let's get a new manager, a few batting order upgrades, and a new bullpen away from competing again. They got to reset everything they do from rookie ball to the big leagues, and especially when it comes to defense, running the bases, and their hitting approach. And the other mitigating factor in me accepting a Crochet deal is the Sox have Brian Bannister running the pitching development. And check out the interview he did with 670 The Score's Dan Bernstein and Lawrence Holmes, as Bannister actually outlined a vision of what the Sox pitching development and pitching will look like. The Sox actually have a forward-thinking, new age guy in their system, and that makes me feel very, very comfortable. Bannister talked about the need to have power lefties and righties with pitches that sink and spin because that plays well to guaranteed rate field. They actually have somebody in the organization that says we got to build a team around where we play the majority of our games. It's a vision. And the Sox must get some bats that hit home runs to fit their home ballpark. And right now, they don't have much of that in the big league lineup or in the minors. So that's why they got to trade Crochet and LRJ. And again, in my heart right here, I'm still keep both at the trade deadline. Unless the trade partner is the Baltimore Orioles, Philadelphia Phillies, or Seattle Mariners. They got the promising bats that you covet. The Yankees and the Dodgers, they have a couple, but for example, Spencer Jones has way too many swing and miss at bats. And also, I'm not a fan of trading them for the sake of trading them. So I know I'm sounding like a politician and spinning it here. But I do believe Chris Getz should have a high price and stick to it. And with all the questions that they have around their value, if no team wants to meet it, then fine. Keep them and move them in the offseason. I get that there's a risk, but you cannot sell for less than 125%, in my opinion. But the team is losing a ton of games now. And that has both of them on the roster. And being a stopper no longer applies to Crochet because they're not even going to let him pitch deep into games. And I love both players, and I get the public perception will be that the Sox just keep trading homegrown players because they don't want to pay them. But this context that we're in right now is the Sox have got to trade them. Otherwise, the promising pitching that they have will keep them in ball games. They're going to continue to lose 3-2 or 4-3 like they have the last 2 games. A little nugget of news on Yoan Moncada came out 2 days ago, and it picked up a little bit of traction yesterday on Sox Twitter world. And I want to discuss why Moncada should never play for the Sox again next on Locked On White Sox. And with summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it is time to explore those U.S. cities you always secretly want to learn more about. Yes, I'm talking about your rivals' cities. With hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival cities. The Sox and the San Francisco Giants, well, they're not exactly rivals, but they will be foes next month when Chicago travels there in mid-August. And why not take a trip out to San Francisco? Check out Fisherman's Wharf, Alcatraz, the Golden Gate Bridge, get some great food in Chinatown, then take in a game that is at that amazing ballpark. That is the only thing that I never did at San Francisco. I've been there a few times. I never got a chance to check out their ballpark, and I hear it's a great time. Always wanted to see historic Fenway Park. Sox will be there in September, so use Booking.com to find a place to lay your head if you want to make those trips. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this MLB season. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. And if picking more or less is your selection skill, then you should try out Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the excitement and win up to 100 times your cash with the summer games on Prize Picks. With Prize Picks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 while watching Team USA rack up the gold medals this summer. You can make a Prize Picks lineup of players across basketball, soccer, tennis, and golf, and more in as little as 60 seconds. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're locked in. 2 or more less selections you might want to go with in tonight's game is the 0.5 on Luis Robert Jr. He went 2 for 5 in the first game of the series against Texas and then 0 for 4 last night. The other is the 0.5 on the first inning runs allowed between starters Chris Flexen and Nathan Eovaldi. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest sports stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And the White Sox take on the Texas Rangers in Game 3 of a 4-game set tonight. First pitch is at 7:05 p.m. Central. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter, and thank you for making the show your first listen. Lots of great White Sox podcasts out there. I just always ask, you make me your first listen. Well, the Sox on Monday returned Yoan Moncada from his rehab assignment as he's still dealing with soreness. Hopefully, he never plays for the White Sox again. And I mean it in the nice way possible for both parties involved. And here's what Chicago Sun-Times beat reporter Daryl Van Schouwen wrote in the Sun-Times on Moncada that I want to discuss. So here's what he wrote. Moncada played in 5 games in Arizona, going 8 for 15. He's medically cleared to play, but isn't comfortable enough and is electing not to push it. Quote, Moncada's rehab was stopped with some anticipated soreness. End quote, Sox manager Pedro Buehrle said Monday. Quote, we'll reevaluate that. We don't think it's anything wrong. Everything I've heard about that injury, even though you're healed, it still feels like similar to what it felt like when it first happened, but it's not. So it's almost like he wants to be sure he has no pain, end quote. The initial prognosis for Moncada, whose career has been filled with injuries, was 3 to 6 months. Buehrle called it erring on the side of caution. Quote, there's nothing where he feels he's taken a step back, end quote. The Sox are building for a future that doesn't include Moncada, who's earning $24 million this year and has a $25 million club option for next year that won't be picked up. He's 29 and wants to catch on with another team in the offseason, so it would behoove him to get more games under his belt. It would also have behooved the Sox, who believe they could have traded Moncada before the July 30th deadline, to have him playing this week. All right. I don't blame Moncada for not wanting to play unless he feels 100%. As is clear, the Sox are moving on. He's only going to get a 1-year prove-it deal. It does not make sense for him to really play at all because the book is out on him. I get Van Skowron saying it would behoove him to play, but look at, for example, what is happening in Eloy Jimenez. It behooved Eloy Jimenez to show that he could play, and you could tell he's still hurt because he can't really drive the ball, and he can't really run the bases. The book is out on Moncada. He's a talented, good defensive third baseman, but he's always hurt. You can't count on him. And coming back to show he can still play is not going to change that. So I would prefer, for Moncada's sake, to just take the rest of the season off, heal up, wish him well on his future endeavors. The Sox believing he has trade value is the one thing that does irk me about this organization. They tend to overvalue players, like thinking Mike Clevenger could be flipped at the deadline, or again, allowing Jimenez to pretty much clear himself to prove he can play hurt. They let players rehab at the big league level, or even rehab for an entire season and then showcase for another team, like what happened with Joe Kelly. The Sox should know that Moncada is now in the Yoan Moncada business. You should just say, hey, okay, you're still under contract. You can use the Arizona facilities to rehab, but otherwise, good luck to you. So he's not going to be playing, I think, all out if he were to come back, and rightfully so, because, again, you're moving on. It's a lost year. He's going to be in business for himself. So is he going to be going 100%? I don't know. I don't think so. And asking him to return to see if he can be showcased, it's just foolish and bad business. 1 week is not going to be like, oh, here's my top prospect, or here's a top 10 prospect. And I get it. You don't want to lose him for nothing. But his injury history and the book on him is gonna necessitate it. Nobody's trading for him. Nobody's trading for Eloy Jimenez. Nobody's trading for Mike Clevenger. So instead, use this time to see who can play third base next season. Although, again, they don't have a lot of great internal options. Right now, it's Nick Senzel. After Lenine Sosa, Danny Mendick, and Ramos failed. However, I would not mind seeing Ramos get another crack after the deadline. I would still like to see, can he hit Major League pitching after baseball came for him? Instead of having Moncada waste our time and also potentially risk getting hurt again. Instead, Moncada should just shut it down for the year and then do some workouts in the offseason to potential suitors, not shooters, sorry about that, to potential suitors to show that, yeah, he can still play the game. Because he's only going to get a 1-year prove-it deal. That's his only hope. So just go your separate ways. Don't expose us to what we're seeing right now with Eloy Jimenez, who cannot drive the ball and is just hitting ground balls and getting out. Just let Yoan Moncada be and move on. Well, enough about getting rid of players. Let's discuss some greatness, and let's talk about Mark Buerhle's amazing career next on Locked On White Sox. Well, the White Sox might be terrible, but they're still playing Major League Baseball, and their slogan is true. It's always better at the ballpark. Hot dogs just taste better, and you can still have a great time despite your beloved team being this bad. And Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. If Garrett Crochet is not traded before the 28th, that might be his final start at home in a White Sox uniform. So you might want to use the Game Time app to check out what could be his final start with the team before the July 30th trade deadline. You also want to check out rookie pitcher Drew Thorpe. You got 2 chances coming up on July 26th against Seattle or on July 31st against the Royals. Game Time has the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference, and you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, Create an account and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And the White Sox take on the Texas Rangers in Game 3 of a 4-game set tonight. First pitch is at 7:05 p.m. Central. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter, and thank you for sticking with me this long. Shout out to all my everydayers. Got a new White Sox hat and a new White Sox hoodie. You could say, why are you still buying White Sox stuff and giving Jerry Reinsdorf your money? It's still one of the best logos. And I even like the alternative Shy logo. And also, like, this hoodie was like $50 marked off at Dick's Sporting Goods. And I'm just a fan of deals. So, and also I got a bald spot. So that's the other thing. If you ever realize, like, if you're ever watching on YouTube, why am I always wearing a hat? I got a bald spot. Okay. And it just keeps getting worse and worse. And my wife says, well, it keeps getting worse because you're wearing a hat. And I want to be like, it's not growing back. It's never going to come back. So covered up with a hat. Figured I'd mix in. I'm probably going to be like our former host, Nick. I'm just going to be like buying hats left and right and just have this like huge array of White Sox hats. Because even though the White Sox are terrible, they still have the iconic logo like that. And they still have some of the best past hats as well. You know, some of their other logos, past logos like the Batman. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of the as you see in the screen over there. If you're watching on YouTube, the old school with the S and the O and the X, and then the 1959 logo too. Just, you know, huge fan of the Sox logos. Also, Mark Buerhle may never make the Hall of Famer, but he is one of the best pitchers I ever saw. And yesterday marked the 15-year anniversary of his perfect game against the Tampa Bay Rays. And since on Wednesday, I like to do Way Back Wednesday, let's reflect on the greatness of Mark Buerhle. Now, he never threw hard, and he was taken in the 38th round. But what he did do was show up every 5 days and get ground ball outs. 362 career double plays. That ranks him only behind Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, and Andy Pettitte. He logged 3,283 in a third career innings. 2,476 and two-thirds of them were with the White Sox in 12 seasons on the South Side. He had 1,870 strikeouts in a 16-year career, with 1,396 coming for the Sox. And the lefty posted at least 200 innings pitched, 30 starts, and double-digit victories in all 11 years as he was a starter with the White Sox. Think about that. He showed up, basically logged, 30 starts, and won enough innings to pitch 200 innings. That's unheard of today. And that was only like 10 years ago. I mean, the guy retired last decade. He had 3 more seasons of 200-plus innings when he went to Miami and Toronto. And his final season, he almost came close with 198 and two-thirds innings. Durability, consistency, and pitching quick was his trademark. I loved, in the era of no pitch clock, I loved watching Mark Buerhle pitch because he just worked so efficiently. I once saw him battle Roy Halladay, who also worked very fast when Halladay was with the Blue Jays. The game started at 6:05. So I went down to Guaranteed Rate Field. I want to say it was 2008 or 2009 or even 2010. Either way, game starts at 6:05. Last call for beer in the 7th inning was an hour later. And I was back with my buddy at a bar near his apartment on the north side by 8. That's how fast the game went. I think it was over in like an hour and a half, and the Sox won 2-0. He was part of that magical starting rotation in 2005 that won the World Series, and that rotation that threw 4 straight complete games to win in the ALCS. And it was his Game 2 complete game performance that kicked it all off. He made 5 All-Star teams, won 4 Gold Gloves, and he also threw a no-hitter. And in that no-hitter, he still pitched to the minimum. MLB.com's Paul Casilla, he made the case for Buerhle to go into the Hall of Fame last year. He had it up on MLB.com, and he based it on 4 criteria. One, durability and consistency in an era where not many pitchers had either. I mean, you could count on Mark Buerhle being in the rotation every year and logging 200 innings and logging 200 good career innings. Again, he never had the fastest stuff. He just had one of those rubber arms, and he used great location and great command. Two, his defense. I mean, think about it. He won 4 Gold Gloves, and he may have made one of the greatest defensive plays. I want to say, what was it, opening day 2008 or 2009, where he flipped it underneath his legs, a ground ball to Paul Konerko. It's still one of the most iconic plays I've ever seen. His ability to limit damage. Again, when I mentioned the double plays, if guys got on base, he wasn't going to allow many runs to get through. He was just really, really good at run prevention. And now in an era where we're just saying, where we finally discovered, hey, you don't need to be striking out guys left and right. You just need to get outs. Mark Buerhle got outs. And then obviously his extra special moments. Plus, for his career with those old school voters, he does have at least 214 career wins, with 161 coming on the south side. So he's at least over 200 career wins. And I believe his B-WAR was like 58.1. The problem is when you look at Baseball Reference, his comps only have like 2 Hall of Famers, and one of them is Catfish Hunter. So, everybody always says Mark Buerhle is obviously in the Hall of Very Good, but we don't know if he'll be in the Hall of Fame. But it's a very interesting case study, because when you look at how the dynamics of pitching changed, it started to change during his era. We started to look at pitching. You and I started, the front office has started to look at pitching different just as Mark Buerhle came up. And then he kept pitching consistently and getting outs. And now today, think about it, Drew Thorpe. One of the things that he reminds me of is a right-handed Mark Buerhle. And I really hope Drew Thorpe can follow that same career path. And when things looked very dark for the Sox in the late 90s, Mark Buerhle showing that he could be a potential ace was one of the few things that started to give us hope. And if the Sox are going to trade Garrett Crochet, you at least have Drew Thorpe to mitigate him being traded. And again, I hope Drew Thorpe can follow the same career path, only from the right side, as Mark Buerhle. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. But before I go, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest sports stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're watching on YouTube, sorry that I'm scratching right under my nose. You ever get one of those itches where it's just like, God, it's so annoying, but it's right near your nose, and you're like, I want to itch, but I don't want to look like I'm picking my nose, because you're not exactly picking your nose, So hopefully I didn't gross you out there. I'll be back tomorrow, and I want to power rank the potential trade partners for Garrett Crochet, Eric Fetty, and Luis Robert Jr. Feel free to leave comments about today's topics regarding why it's time to accept the Sox needing to trade Crochet and Robert Jr., Yoan Moncada should never play again for the Sox, and appreciating Mark Buerhle. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow.